Gentlemen, let's talk about something fundamental. Solitude. A man who lives alone without a girlfriend stands at a crossroads. He either becomes stronger through self-discipline and purpose, or he falls into stagnation, isolation, and despair. The absence of a romantic partner doesn't just mean he lacks affection. It means he has no immediate external source of validation, no one to push him toward higher aspirations, no one to challenge his complacency. His habits and routine will follow him wherever he goes. There's no separation. Now you might think, well, I don't need anyone else. I'm independent. I take care of myself. And sure, there's truth to that. Independence is vital. But let's be clear, living alone, truly alone, is not the same as being strong. Strength comes from engagement with the world, from taking on responsibility, from refining yourself in the presence of others. And here's the reality. You can trick yourself into believing that you're content in solitude. You wake up, you eat, you work, you play video games, you scroll through social media, you distract yourself. Days turn into weeks, weeks into months, and suddenly the silence in your apartment is no longer peaceful, it's deafening. The lack of another voice, another perspective, another challenge begins to eat away at your sense of purpose. But here's the key. If you're alone, you have two choices. You either use that solitude as an opportunity to build something meaningful, or you let it consume you. Because here's what happens to a man who lets isolation win. His discipline fades, his energy wanes, his ability to interact with the world erodes. He becomes passive. So what do? You structure your life with purpose. You cultivate discipline like your survival depends on it. Because in many ways it does. You learn to cook, not just heat up junk food. You read, not just to pass the time, but to refine your mind. You train your body, not just to look good, but because physical strength reinforces. And most importantly, you connect. If you don't have a romantic partner, that's fine. But you cannot be a man alone in the world. You must seek out friends, mentors, colleagues, communities. You must challenge yourself socially, or you will become invisible, not just to others, but to yourself. The question isn't whether a man can live alone without a girlfriend. He can. The real question is whether he is truly alive in that solitude or whether he's merely existing. And that, gentlemen, is entirely up to him. Living alone without a partner is a paradox of human existence. On one hand, it grants a man absolute freedom. Freedom to structure his days as he pleases, to pursue his ambitions without compromise, to live unbound by the expectations or needs of another. There is a certain appeal in this autonomy, in the ability to move through life without external constraints. He can wake up when he chooses, eat what he likes, dedicate his time entirely to personal goals, and avoid the complications that relationships inevitably bring. For many men, especially those who have experienced difficult or unfulfilling relationships, solitude initially feels like a form of liberation, a chance to focus on self-improvement, career aspirations, or personal hobbies without distraction. Yet beneath this surface of independence lies a deeper reality, one that often emerges only after an extended period of isolation. With freedom comes responsibility, and with responsibility comes the burden of managing one's own emotional and psychological well-being. When a man lives alone, he is solely accountable for how he navigates his inner world. There is no external force to regulate his emotions, no immediate companionship to provide warmth, no daily interactions that force him to step outside of his own thoughts. It is entirely up to him to maintain his sense of purpose, his motivation, his engagement with the world. And this is where solitude can become dangerous. For some men, solitude fosters discipline and self-reliance. They take the opportunity to refine their skills, cultivate knowledge, and develop a strong internal framework for resilience. They learn to manage their emotions without depending on validation from others, to take ownership of their failures, and to become the kind of man who can stand firmly on his own. This is the ideal outcome. Many men, instead of using solitude as a means of self-development, drift into patterns of stagnation, without the external accountability that relationships often provide, they begin to lose their structure. Days become repetitive, devoid of challenge or novelty. The absence of another person to share thoughts and experiences with leads to an increasing detachment from the world. There is a deceptive comfort in isolation. When a man is alone, he avoids conflict, emotional turbulence, and the responsibilities that come with maintaining a relationship. But he also misses out on the very struggles that refine character and give life depth. Human beings are social creatures, wired for connection, and even the most independent men are not immune to the psychological effects of prolonged loneliness. Over time, solitude can dull the edges of ambition. A man may still go through the motions of his daily routine, but without shared experiences, without meaningful conversations, without the presence of another to challenge his thinking or provide support, his emotional landscape begins to shrink. He becomes more inwardly focused, his thoughts circling the same patterns, his perspective narrowing. And then, one day, he realizes something unsettling. The silence in his home, once peaceful, has become oppressive. The solitude, once a source of strength, now feels like a weight. The freedom that once seemed so appealing now carries a hidden cost. The burden of complete self-sufficiency. In a relationship, even in its most difficult moments, there is an external force that demands effort, growth, and adaptation. Alone, a man must generate this force himself. If he does not, he risks fading into a passive existence where life is merely something that happens rather than something he actively engages with. The burden of solitude is not just the absence of companionship, it is the requirement of being one's own source of structure, motivation, and emotional stability. It is the challenge of maintaining momentum without external reinforcement. It is a test of whether a man can truly stand alone, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. Some men rise to this challenge and become stronger because of it. Others, slowly and without realizing it, allow solitude to erode their sense of purpose. And in the end, whether solitude becomes a blessing or a curse is determined by the choices a man makes in the silence of his own company. Discipline is the cornerstone of a man's existence when he walks through life alone, without a partner to provide external validation, emotional support, or shared responsibility. He must rely entirely on his own ability to create order and structure. This is both a challenge and an opportunity, a test of whether he can impose the necessary structure upon himself, or whether he will allow his life to drift into aimlessness. Without discipline, solitude quickly turns into stagnation, and the absence of external accountability can lead to a slow erosion of ambition, purpose, and self-respect. A man who is alone has no one to remind him of his goals, no one to encourage him to get up early, no one to reinforce good habits or call him out when he slips into complacency. He must become his own authority, his own source of motivation. This requires an internal framework of discipline strong enough to resist the temptations of comfort, distraction, and procrastination. It is easy to let time slip away when there is no one waiting for you, no one relying on you, no shared vision pulling you forward. A day without structure quickly becomes a week without progress, and before long, months pass without any real movement toward anything meaningful. Discipline is not about rigid control or punishment. It is about the ability to make decisions that align with a greater purpose, even when there is no immediate reward. A man must train himself to wake up with a mission, to establish routines that reinforce his growth, to set goals and pursue them with unwavering focus. He cannot afford to be ruled by fleeting emotions or momentary desires, because in solitude, no one will correct him when he veers off course. If he lacks discipline, his habits will deteriorate, his sleep schedule will become inconsistent, his diet will decline, his physical health will suffer, and his mental clarity will diminish. He may rationalize his lack of structure by convincing himself that he is simply enjoying his freedom, but in reality, He is allowing his potential to decay. Discipline in solitude extends beyond mere routine. It is about the ability to manage one's mind, to maintain control over thoughts, emotions, and impulses. Without the emotional regulation that comes from shared experiences, a man must cultivate inner stability. He must learn to sit with his own thoughts, to work through moments of doubt and loneliness without resorting to self-destructive behaviors. He must be able to push forward when motivation fades, because without discipline, motivation is fleeting and unreliable. There is also a deeper psychological component to discipline. When a man commits to structure, he builds self-respect. He proves to himself that he is capable of mastery, that he can impose order on his own existence. This is crucial because in solitude, a man's relationship with himself is paramount. If he allows himself to slip into laziness, indulgence, or apathy, he begins to lose trust in his own abilities. But if he demonstrates discipline through consistent effort, through self-imposed challenges, through the pursuit of excellence, he develops an unshakable belief in himself. This self-belief becomes his foundation, his guiding force when there is no external reinforcement. A man who lives alone must view discipline not as an obligation, but as a necessity for survival. It is the force that keeps his mind sharp, his body strong, and his purpose clear. It is what prevents him from being swallowed by the inertia of isolation. The world does not owe him structure, nor will it impose it upon him. He must create it for himself every day, without excuse. Because without discipline, solitude does not make a man free, it makes him lost. Solitude, when used wisely, can be a powerful tool for self-reflection and growth. It allows a man to step away from distractions, to analyze his life, to refine his thoughts, and to cultivate independence. Many great minds throughout history have embraced solitude as a means of deep introspection, finding clarity and strength in the absence of noise. However, there is a fine line between solitude and isolation, and when that line is crossed, the benefits of being alone begin to erode. What was once a period of productive reflection can slowly turn into stagnation, detachment, and an alarming loss of social competence. At first, isolation may not seem dangerous. It often starts subtly. A man spends more time by himself, prioritizing personal projects, enjoying the freedom of being unburdened by social obligations. He tells himself that he is simply focusing on his goals, that he doesn't need constant interaction to be fulfilled. And in truth, there is a certain appeal to living in one's own world, unshaped by the influence of others. The problem arises when solitude becomes the default state rather than a temporary retreat. The longer a man remains isolated, the more his perception of reality becomes distorted. One of the first signs of unhealthy isolation is stagnation. Without social interactions to provide feedback, challenge ideas, or introduce new perspectives, a man's thinking begins to loop in predictable patterns. His ambitions may fade because there is no external reinforcement pushing him forward. When left entirely to his own devices, without external accountability, it becomes easier to settle into routines that lack growth. He may still convince himself that he's working towards something meaningful, but without exposure to the world outside his own mind, his progress slows. There is no friction, no challenge, no sense of urgency. Life becomes comfortable. But comfort in isolation often leads to decay. Beyond stagnation, prolonged isolation fosters detachment. Human beings are inherently social creatures. Interaction is wired into our psychology. When a man removes himself from social circles for too long, his ability to connect with others begins to weaken. The rhythms of conversation, the nuances of body language, the unspoken rules of social engagement, all of these skills require practice. When a man isolates himself, he loses touch with them. He becomes increasingly comfortable in his own presence, but less capable in the presence of others. Over time, he may begin to feel out of sync with the world, as if he is watching life unfold from behind a glass barrier. This detachment doesn't just affect how he interacts with others, it changes how he perceives himself. When a man is alone for too long, he can start to see himself through a warped lens. He may become overly critical, magnifying his flaws without external reassurance. Or he may go in the opposite direction, building an inflated self impued that isn't tested by real-world interactions. In either case, isolation skews self-perception, making it harder to reintegrate into social life. Perhaps the most alarming consequence of prolonged isolation is the gradual loss of social competence. Social skills, like any other ability, require regular use. A man who isolates himself for too long will find that, when he does attempt to re-engage, he struggles. Conversations feel awkward. He second-guesses his words. He misreads social cues. And because these experiences are uncomfortable, he may withdraw further, reinforcing the cycle of isolation. Over time, he convinces himself that he simply doesn't fit in, that he is better off alone. But this is not because he is incapable of connection. It is because he has neglected the skills required to connect. Isolation is insidious because it often feels like a choice, even when it has become a trap. The longer a man stays in it, the harder it is to break free. The world moves on without him. Friendships fade, and reintegration becomes more difficult. But the solution is not complicated. It requires conscious effort. A man must actively seek engagement, even when it feels unnatural at first. He must push himself into uncomfortable social situations, challenge his own excuses, and recognize that solitude, when overindulged, ceases to be a strength and becomes a weakness. Solitude is a tool, but isolation is a disease. If a man does not guard against it, he risks waking up one day to find that he has not only lost his connection to the world, but, more importantly, his connection to himself. Masculine growth is forged through challenge. A man without a romantic partner does not have the built-in responsibilities, emotional exchanges, and daily interactions that a relationship naturally provides. Without this dynamic force pushing him forward, he must deliberately seek out challenges elsewhere lest he drift into complacency. Growth does not happen in comfort. It happens in adversity. A man who is alone must decide whether his solitude will be a catalyst for transformation or an excuse for stagnation. Without the external structure of a relationship, a man must create his own path toward growth. This means engaging with the world in meaningful ways, taking on responsibilities, and setting ambitious goals. The worst mistake a man can make in solitude is to slip into a passive existence, filling his time with distractions rather than purpose. It is easy to waste days, weeks, even years in meaningless entertainment, consuming rather than creating, avoiding struggle rather than embracing it. But growth demands friction. It demands that a man put himself in situations where he must rise to meet the challenge. Physical discipline is one of the most direct ways to cultivate masculine growth. Training the body is not just about aesthetics or health, it is about mastering oneself. The gym, the dojo, the running trail, these places are not merely spaces for exercise, but arenas where a man confronts his limits. Lifting weights teaches patience and perseverance. Martial arts teach discipline and resilience. Endurance training cultivates mental toughness. A man who commits to physical excellence is not just sculpting his body, he is forging his character. He is proving to himself day after day that he can push through pain, discomfort, and fatigue. This strength carries over into all other areas of life. Beyond the physical, a man must challenge himself intellectually and creatively. Without a relationship to provide intellectual stimulation through conversation and shared perspectives, he must seek knowledge actively. Reading, learning new skills, engaging in deep work, these are the mental equivalents of lifting heavy weights. A man should be expanding his mind, questioning his beliefs, refining his thoughts. He should take on projects that stretch his capabilities, whether it is writing, building, coding, or creating. Complacency thrives in routine. Growth thrives in challenge. If a man does not push his intellect, he risks falling into a stagnant, passive way of thinking, where his mind becomes dull and untested. Social engagement is another critical area where a man must challenge himself. It is easy to withdraw from social life when there is no partner drawing him into shared experiences. But isolation, when unchecked, weakens social intelligence. A man must be deliberate in building and maintaining relationships with friends, mentors, colleagues, and even strangers. He should seek out environments where he is forced to interact, where he must learn to communicate effectively, where he must navigate different personalities and perspectives. Social competence is a skill, and like any skill, it deteriorates if not practiced. Purpose is perhaps the most significant challenge a man must embrace. Without the external validation and emotional connection of a partner, a man must define his own mission. This mission cannot be vague or half-hearted. It must be something that drives him forward every day. Whether it is career ambition, creative pursuits, athletic excellence, or a deeper philosophical journey, a man must wake up with a sense of direction. A man with a mission does not need distractions to fill his time. His time is already accounted for, devoted to something greater than himself. Solitude is neither good nor bad, it is what a man makes of it. Used correctly, it becomes a period of immense growth, a time to sharpen his mind, strengthen his body, deepen his character, and refine his purpose. Used poorly, it becomes an excuse for comfort, laziness, and avoidance. A man who understands the necessity of challenge does not fear solitude. He uses it as fuel. He seeks adversity, knowing that every hardship overcome makes him stronger, and in doing so he transforms not only his life but himself. Human beings are inherently social creatures, and no man, no matter how independent or self-sufficient, can thrive in complete isolation. While solitude can be valuable for self-reflection and personal growth, prolonged detachment from social interaction leads to loneliness, stagnation, and even nihilism. A man without a romantic relationship must not mistake being alone for being disconnected. He must actively engage with the world, build meaningful relationships, and foster a sense of belonging within his community. Without strong social bonds, he risks falling into a void where his sense of purpose and identity slowly erode. Friendships serve as one of the most essential pillars of a man's social life. A strong circle of friends provides camaraderie, support, and accountability. Through shared experiences, challenges, and discussions, friendships offer a source of motivation and perspective that cannot be found in isolation. Men sharpen one another through competition, collaboration, and honest feedback. And so if a man surrounded by good friends is less likely to fall into self-destructive habits or allow complacency to take root. His friends challenge him, encourage him, and remind him of his worth when he begins to doubt himself. But friendships do not maintain themselves. They require effort. A man must take the initiative to reach out, to organize gatherings, to be present in the lives of those he values. Passively waiting for social interactions to happen leads only to further isolation. Beyond friendships, mentors play a crucial role in a man's development. Without a romantic partner, a man must be even more intentional about seeking guidance from those who have walked the path before him. A mentor, whether in career, philosophy, fitness, or any other domain, provides wisdom, perspective, and a level of accountability that is difficult to cultivate alone. A mentor helps a man refine his thinking, avoid common pitfalls, and accelerate his growth. Too many men try to navigate life without seeking counsel, believing they must figure everything out on their own. But wisdom is often borrowed before it is earned, and a man who isolates himself from those who can teach him is bound to repeat avoidable mistakes. Finding mentors requires humility and effort. A man must put himself in environments where experienced individuals gather, whether in professional settings, social organizations, or intellectual circles. He must be willing to listen more than he speaks and to apply the lessons he learns. Community is another essential component of a man's social foundation. Even if he does not have a romantic partner, he must still belong to something greater than himself. Whether it is a professional network, a sports team, a creative group, a volunteer organization, or a religious institution, being part of a community reinforces a sense of purpose. It reminds a man that his actions affect others, that he has a role to play in the world. A man who engages with his community gains both practical and emotional benefits. He expands his network, finds new opportunities, and feels the satisfaction of contributing to something meaningful. The danger of neglecting social bonds is not just loneliness, it is nihilism. When a man withdraws too far from the world, his sense of meaning begins to erode. He may convince himself that relationships are unnecessary, that he is better off alone, that the world has nothing to offer him. But this mindset is a slow descent into apathy. A man without strong social connections is far more susceptible to depression, anxiety, and destructive habits. He becomes trapped in his own mind, lacking the external feedback that keeps thoughts and emotions balanced. Over time, this can lead to a loss of motivation and an increasing sense of detachment from life itself. Maintaining social bonds requires effort, but the rewards are immeasurable. A man who cultivates friendships, seeks mentors, and engages with his community builds a foundation that sustains him through life's inevitable struggles. He has people to turn to in times of hardship, people to celebrate with in times of success, and a sense of connection that gives life depth and meaning. The strength of a man is not just in his ability to stand alone, but in his ability to stand alongside others. A life without meaningful relationships is a life half-lived. A man must make a choice to build a life where he can thrive in solitude, or to shape himself into someone capable of forming meaningful companionship. Both paths demand effort, discipline, and a deep sense of purpose. There is no room for passivity, no waiting for circumstances to improve on their own, no drifting through life, hoping for fulfillment to arrive uninvited. A man must take ownership of his existence, forging himself into someone worthy of respect, both from himself and from others. Whether he walks alone or with a partner, his journey must be one of continuous growth. If a man chooses to walk alone, he must ensure that his solitude is not a refuge from responsibility, but a foundation for strength. To thrive alone is to cultivate independence, not just in a practical sense, but in an emotional and psychological one. It means learning to be self-sufficient, not just in financial matters or daily survival, but in the ability to generate meaning and purpose without external validation. A man who thrives alone does not retreat into complacency. He builds, he creates, he sharpens his mind and body. He does not numb himself with distractions or lose himself in fleeting pleasures. Instead, he uses his solitude as an opportunity for mastery of skills, of knowledge of himself. But solitude must not turn into isolation. A man without a romantic partner still needs deep and meaningful connections, friendships, mentors, community. These are essential to his well-being. He must make the effort to engage with the world, to challenge his ideas against those of others, to contribute to something larger than himself. Without this, solitude becomes a slow descent into detachment, and detachment leads to a life devoid of meaning. A man who chooses to remain alone must ensure that he is truly living, not merely existing in comfortable numbness. If a man chooses to build a life that welcomes companionship, he must recognize that meaningful relationships are not given, they are earned. A fulfilling relationship is not something that simply happens. It is something created through effort, through self-improvement, through becoming the kind of man who naturally attracts deep and lasting connection. This does not mean performing or pretending to be someone he is not. It means genuinely cultivating the traits that make a man strong, reliable, and worthy of respect. Confidence, discipline, emotional intelligence, ambition. These are qualities that draw others in, not through manipulation, but through their inherent value. Building a life that welcomes companionship requires facing one's weaknesses. A man who lacks confidence must confront the source of his insecurities. A man who struggles with discipline must instill structure in his daily life. A man who is bitter or resentful must address the wounds that created those emotions rather than projecting them onto the world. It is not enough to simply desire a meaningful relationship. A man must become the kind of person who naturally fits into one. Regardless of which path a man chooses, the core principles remain the same. He must have purpose, a reason to wake up in the morning beyond fleeting pleasures or obligations. He must have self-respect, built through discipline and effort so that he does not compromise his integrity for the sake of comfort. And he must embrace continuous growth, because stagnation leads only to regret. Whether he walks alone or alongside another, a man's journey is one of constant refinement. He is either moving forward or slipping backward. There is no standing still. The path forward is not easy, but it is clear. A man must take responsibility for his own existence, shaping himself into someone who thrives regardless of circumstance. He must ensure that whether he remains alone or finds companionship, he is a man of substance, of depth, of purpose. Life does not hand out meaning freely. It must be forged. And a man who understands this truth will never be lost. In the end, a man's life is defined by the choices he makes and the challenges he embraces. Whether he walks alone or alongside a partner, he must build himself into someone capable of facing life with strength, purpose, and resilience. Solitude can be a source of power, but unchecked isolation leads to stagnation. Growth requires adversity, discipline, and the courage to engage with the world. It was John Lang who said, quote, "Social bonds, friendships, and mentorship are not luxuries but necessities, keeping a man grounded and connected." The path forward is not about seeking comfort but about forging character. A man must take responsibility for his own development, ensuring that he is not merely drifting but actively shaping his future. If he chooses to thrive alone, he must do so with intent, not out of avoidance. If he seeks companionship, he must become the kind of man who naturally attracts deep and meaningful relationships. In both cases, the foundation remains the same: self-respect, purpose, and continuous growth.